Welcome back to this week's podcast. So lovely to have you with me again, and I hope you've had a great week. It has been great. Let me know. Always reach out to me, social media, James White Sales. Let me know what's happened, or connect with me on LinkedIn if we're not connected there. But look, this week I'm going to talk about something that's really, really, really important when it comes to sales and selling, and that's sales cues or buying signals that you can't ignore. And this is something that is so important because as I'm going to talk about it through the podcast, as human beings, we don't always say everything. We do it through our other signals that we give off. And one of the things that I've built my skill set over time to be good at doing is to be able to spot those signals. And I want you to be in the same situation. And I regularly see salespeople who don't take advantage of some of the cues or signals that they're getting from prospects, and they should. So let's delve into this so that we can help you get the results you want. So look, why is it so important? So especially, obviously I'm from the UK. If you're listening to this all over the world, that's no dramas. But in the UK, we're traditionally quite British about things. And a really good example of this is, and by the way, this is about winning business, but this is also an impact about losing business as well. And I had a person who used to work in my company previously who I always used to talk to consistently about this, because he would say, oh, everything's fine with the customer. Everything's always good. And I'd say, are you sure they're good? And he said, yeah, they're fine. They're really good. They're really, really good shape. And he would then get to the end of the contract that we were working with. He said, oh, the customers decided not to carry on. I said, you told me they were good. He said, yeah, they were good, but he hadn't read the signals, hadn't read the cues. And I think it's so critically important as humans that we really deeply understand other people and what they're doing. And the cues that the people give off, the body language, the signals, the signs through what they say or what they do or what they don't do are so vital to us taking things forward or knowing whether to put more effort and energy into a certain deal. And the reason this is important is because, as I say, lots of people are inherently not going to tell you some information up front. So I've talked a lot about the 4 different types of people that you can have in the reds, yellows, greens, and blues. So dominant, influence, conscientious, and steady. And if you take Thomas Erickson in his book, Surrounded by Idiots, talks around how 50% of the world are conscientious or steady. 50% of the world are steadiness, I should say, the greens. And greens will typically not tell you things straight away because they don't like confrontation. They don't like to say to someone up front something's not right because they don't want to be the center of attention. And a classic example of this is a couple of weeks back. Me and my wife went for dinner, and the person came round and said, is everything okay with your food? And my wife was like, yeah, fine, great, thanks. And as we walked out of the restaurant, she said, oh, I'm not going there again. That was awful. And I was like, well, why don't you tell them? And she's like, oh, well, I don't want to do that. I'm not going to tell them. And it was a very British thing to do, to not tell someone this. So, and that poor restaurant now isn't going to get her coming back. And yet, most people would probably rather know if they've not delivered on what they need to do. They'd rather know that than not. So being able to tap into sales cues or signals or buying signals is critical. And these can be signals that you can use positively to win business, but they can also be signals that you can use to lose, that can help you avoid losing business. There's a client I work with at the moment, and we talk to them about 2 things, growing the business, but protecting the current business. And most companies, when they want to grow, you don't want to lose the existing customers you've got. So these signals are also vital to help you making sure that the customers you've got you can stay with. And by the way, there's a really great question that you can always ask customers. If you've got existing customers that are working with you, that you can always ask them that can make a massive impact and help you really find their happiness level by asking them a simple question. And I always say this to people, if I had to get you to sign for another 12 months tomorrow to work with us, what would you do? And if they say, I'd be a bit unsure, then you probably know that they've got a few issues there. If they go, yeah, I'd happily sign on for another 12 months, then you're in a good place with them. So, look, winning, spotting the cue, spotting the signal, spotting the signs is a critical thing to do. And you need to be able to pick up on that. And I've covered this before, especially Chris Voss's book, Never Split the Difference, is a brilliant read. Listen, if you want to be able to become better at being able to spot that. He was the FBI's chief negotiator and could spot and see signals of a number of things. So and I think what you'll get is some verbal cues that people will give you, or verbal, signals, but you'll also get some non-verbal cues. So let me give you 5 or 6 in each category, and we can sort of go from there. So here's a cue to look out for. If a prospect says to you, "That's interesting, tell me more," what does that mean? That to me is done how they've said it. But if they're saying, "That sounds interesting, tell me more," what it's sort of meaning is that they're going through a process in their head of, okay, they're sort of, you can imagine them sort of cogitating the fact of, if this does this and this, okay, how would that work? So they're quite keen to find out more as a result of that. So I had someone yesterday on a sales call was like, we talked about a solution where we can provide an outsourced salesperson for them. And they're like, okay, tell me more about that. So to me, that's a really good example of a buying signal. And what we've got to be able to do is, in that situation is, and clever salespeople will go, yeah, no problem at all. Happy to share some more information. What would be of most interest? What can I share that would be most useful for you? Or what particularly would be the things you'd like to see? And probe into those areas. And hopefully that person might say, I'd like to see how it works and what it does and where it offers and what its pricing is. Okay, and tell me what makes that so key for you. With that nice empathetic tone we're engaging. So the other thing that you you might get is a cue is if someone says to you, "Tell me specifically about how that feature works," or "How me specifically how that part operates." And what that's maybe doing is it's giving them a specific area that they're concerned about, or that they've got a doubt about, that is, maybe making them feel a bit unsure. So maybe there's a part of your solution, if they continue saying, talk me through how that particular bit works, maybe that part is a critical bit for them, that if they can get convinced that this is going to do what they want it to, then they're going to feel like they're in a good position to go forward. Or maybe that's an area they've been burnt with in the past that didn't work for them, and so therefore they're really just trying to get more detail to find that out. So when they're asking for specifics about an area, then I think that's a really, really, really good sign for you to look at. And another one is when they're asking about pricing or contracts. So one of the things is, someone will say to me, well, what would the contract look like for that solution? Or what would how would that come together? That to me is a really good example of a buying signal. So what they're doing is they're thinking already, especially if you've not talked about pricing so far and it's sort of the end of the process, they're thinking, okay, I think this solution can do what I want it to do. Can it now? Does it match up from a value perspective? And what does the contractual terms look like? So in a way, they're sort of, in their head are thinking, yeah, this can work nicely for me, but I want to then check these other elements. But it's a good indication, it's a good signal, and it's a buying sign. Another great cue that you can have that someone will say to you will be, how quickly could this be deployed? Or what timescales are we working on to do this? So again, in their mind, they've gone for a process where they think that the product or service can do what they want it to do. And now they're thinking about the practicalities of how it can be implemented and put in place. So if they say, when could this be implemented by, or how quickly can this be put in place? They're in my mind, they're looking at, and from my experience, they're looking and thinking, okay, this can help me solve a problem. Okay, this could be a good option for me to look at and consider. So great way to think about that is to say, great, happy to talk about those elements. Talk me through your thoughts around what you want to see in place by when, and what makes that timescale so critical for you. Again, you'll notice from this is we're not just hearing the words, but we're then following up in the right way with the right type of prompts and nudges to get what we sort of want from it. So great example of someone tells me around timescales that I would be looking for. So these are, existing cues. That there is another one I think you can use when someone talks about, let's say maybe you're engaging with someone at a business that's you've already got a provider in place. They might ask the questions such as, how would the transition work? How would the migration work? How would the change work? So what they're doing in that situation, maybe most people are, I was talking to a customer yesterday who works in the IT server basis. We know that the big issue for his clients is the migration from one system to the other. But when someone asks that question, it's giving them that thought process and should give you that hope that, okay, they're considering what this can look like. So again, in that situation there, what we've done with that customer is we've helped them outline the step-by-step process that they go through to do the transition. So when we work with new clients, in order to make sure everything works seamlessly, here's what we do. Here's how we make that happen so it's seamless and doesn't create a problem for you. Because you've got to, again, prospects are looking for the solution, but they need evidence. They need to see how to make sure it's going to deliver on what they say it will. So these are some examples of verbal cues that you should be listening out for when you're engaging with prospects to get them to be in a position where they can hopefully, they're going to move things forward. It's not to say, and again, as I always say, the way in which people say things is as critical as the words they say. So if you remember, I've done this on a podcast before, Albert Mehrabian, he searched him up, Mehrabian, talked about the success of a communication. And only in the success of a communication, only 7% of the communication success is driven to the words. The other 93% is delivered in the tonality and the way in which the message is delivered, with the way in which the message is delivered being 55% of the success. So it's called Albert Mehrabian. So you've always got to be listening out for the way in which people say things. And so don't just be, don't have happy ears. Don't just listen to what the person is telling you. Listen to the way they're saying it to you. So if, for example, what I've just talked about, someone says, how quickly could that be implemented versus, how quickly can that be implemented? I'd be looking out for that tonality. How quickly could that be implemented? Is an inquisitive, okay, I think this could work for me. Oh, how quickly does that get implemented? It's a bit boring. It's a bit, I'm not really bothered, but let's see. So look out for those tonality elements and listen out to those cues. And it's going to help you a huge amount in terms of being able to engage with people and make sure you're listening to what they're really sort of saying in. So what are some of the other things that you can do? The other thing, obviously, about price is when people are negotiating on price. If someone's starting to want to negotiate on price, that's another cue that you can listen into. Or what can we do about the price? I did a podcast actually quite recently where I talked about negotiation on price. So that's one of those things. If someone's saying, what can we do about price? It's meaning that they feel that the solution could work for them. So how we handle that is key. Here's a couple of non-verbal cues that you should be looking out for. And again, these aren't, one size fits all. People are different, 4 types of people, as I've talked about before. But one way I will look out for when I'm in conversations with people, especially face to face, are they leaning in or are they leaning back? So leaning in, if I see someone leaning in, talking to me, tell me a bit more about how that solution can be deployed. They're leaning into the process. I look at it and say, okay, that's a buying signal. That's a cue there that they're intrigued by this. They're quite positive about what this could look like. Another thing that I will also look for will be regular nods, okay? So I know it sounds stupid, but I would literally be looking out for their facial gestures and looking out for, they continue to nod. So if someone's nodding around, for example, when you're going through how the solution's implemented, let's say you're talking about a migration plan, and they're going, okay, yeah, I can see. And again, if you're listening to the podcast, you won't see me doing this, but head on over to the YouTube channel and watch this. You can see me. I'm nodding my head. If someone's sort of nodding their head gently, they're engaging. They're sort of committed to the process. They're feeling like this can do something for them. Now, obviously, the other side of that is if you've got someone that's literally folded their arms in a defensive mode, then that's a signal that you want to be a little bit careful about. So if someone's folding their arms and looking sort of quite unapproachable, it generally means their barriers are up. They're protecting themselves. Now, that's certainly not a buying signal, but it is a buying signal. It's a non-buying signal in many cases. If in the early, the later part of the sales process, your prospect is giving you that sort of look, then you should be a bit concerned about that. I would potentially be looking to ask a question such as, look, just wanted to check that what I'm sharing is valuable and helpful to you here, and is giving you what you need in order to help you make a decision, rather than ignoring the body language and the signals that they're giving. Another thing that I think you can look for as a non-verbal cue is where their head is at in terms of where their head approaches things. So again, if you're watching this video, you'll know what I mean, but if you're listening, so when someone tilts their head, and I had a friend of mine who used to do this a lot, and they would tilt their head and look as if you think. So if you imagine you've got this thought process where you're tilting your head and thinking, but the fact that they're tilting their head means that they're opening up their artery, their neck artery. Now, the neck is the most precious, most what's the word? The important part of our body. If we get, someone, when we expose it, it means that we're vulnerable. So when someone's looking at that, it means they're considering and thinking around something. It makes me think, okay, this is a buying signal. They're trying to work out how it would work or be utilized in their world. So again, feed in on that and look out for that reaction. But another signal to maybe avoid as a result of that as well is also when someone is covering their face. So when someone's covering their face, and again, rubbing their eyes and covering their face, that's an indication that they want to erase what they've just heard. So maybe you've talked to someone about a price, and then someone starts rubbing their hands, and like if you're watching the video, like this, that's going to give them a concern on they've heard something that they feel uncomfortable with. So again, it's a signal that you want to look out for to avoid. It may be when you've talked about price, or maybe when you've talked about timescales, that they're thinking about this. So look, these are all signals that we've got to engage with. A couple of other things that you can use as a signal. Tonality, like I mentioned, is key. So when I'm engaging, again, I've won 2 bits of business in the last couple of months. When I'm first talking to someone, I get a tonality that's a little bit more flatter, a bit more calm, a bit more reserved, a bit more steady. When I've then started to build a relationship and I've then had conversations with them, the tone becomes a bit more relaxed. It's more, oh yeah, it sounds like a great idea, rather than it sounds like a good idea. And when I hear that tonality, it makes me go, right, I know I'm moving closer to the finish line to get them on board with things. So listen out for tonality. Listen, and I always think people generally have sort of, 3, even though people that are the blues, the conscientious, those are a bit more introverted, they can generally have sort of 3 tones. One, which is a bit more, they're really keen, they're a bit more enthusiastic. One of which is they're deadpan, they're not very happy, and they're sort of middle ground. So listen out for tonality, and generally people have 2 or 3 in the main, and listen out for, are you getting that positive, that negative, or that middle ground tone when you're asking questions, which might give you a clue as to what they're thinking and what they're doing. A couple of other things just to pay attention to in terms of buying signals that if you can look out for on your CRM system or your technology system is open your email multiple times. So there are some tools that you can use now that can enable you to see if someone's opened your email multiple times, or if they forwarded your email onto other people. You can see this in technology now. Or whether they visited a web page, for example. If they continue to go back to those pages, and then an area where you can put something in place called lead scoring, those again are signals and signs that they're trying to correlate something and put something together in their world. So look, these are just indications of signals and signs to look out for to protect your book of business or in your client book, but also to win business. And as I said, as human beings, we don't always give everything away. By nature, we protect ourselves. So let's really understand the people that we're talking to and what they're doing through what they're not saying, the signals, the cues they're giving off. And if we become in tune with that, we've got a far better chance of working with them. Now, look, I run some courses around how you can spot different types of people. So if this is something you're thinking, I'd like to know more about this or get better at this, I run a course on how you can spot the 4 different types of people, and you can identify where that person is, and you can spot different people will give off different signals and signs. And when you become an expert at looking at that, it can help you do more and win more. But just be in tune with it. It makes such a massive difference. People aren't always going to be upfront and honest with you. Some will, but a lot of people won't, because they don't want the confrontation. They don't want to be in a position where they're feeling like they're being rude to someone. So you've got to listen out for what you're hearing, but what you're not hearing, and make sure you follow up on that in the right way. So as I always do, I follow I put the podcast with an inspirational story, and I wanted to talk about a story about a guy in London, actually, called Eric McBean. And inspirational stories like this, I love stories that, of people overcoming personal challenges. And at 59, Eric had been made redundant by his company, and at 59, that's a tough age. You're thinking, wow, what, how many more years left have I got? But at 60, Eric launched his own rubbish compacting business called Squash. After he was where he lived, there was overflowing bins, and he'd implemented a system for his employer, but they'd made him redundant. And then using his pension and his redundancy package, he started this business called Squash, which now compacts waste in bins to create more space. And he's now won contracts with the NHS and housing associations, and has been shortlisted for a British Business Award. So Eric, fantastic achievement. I'd love to have you as a guest on the podcast to talk about how you made it happen, how you had that courage to overcome the difficulty of being made redundant and then still come out and deliver a business at the age of 60, I think is incredible and inspiration to us all. And as I shared a couple of weeks ago on a podcast, or I will be sharing on a podcast, of a story about a guy who got a degree at 96, it's never too late to do the things you want to do if you believe and want it enough. So I hope Eric's story is a good inspiration for you. If it is, use that to motivate you to have a brilliant week. Thanks ever so much for listening, as I always do. Please share the podcast with other people. And if you could just give us a little like or review, that would be a big help as well. Just click that 5-star button. And if it's not 5-star, then you tell me directly. Tell me what I can do to improve. If you think the podcast's a load of old turnip, then that's absolutely fine as well. Let me know. Or I've got a skin like a rhino's backside, has been in sales a long time. So tell me what you think. If you do love the podcast and think it helps you and gives you some insights, please give it a like and rating and share it with others so we can help more people get great sales results. But that's it for this week. Wonderful to have you as ever. And I look forward to seeing you next week. Stay safe and keep smiling. Take care. Bye-bye.